Welcome, everyone. Jim Williams here, coming to you from the beautiful paradise of Central Florida, JWW on the move. Document today as February 11, Wednesday, 2026. And today's episode begins in Kissimmee, Florida, at the railroad station that was originally built in 1883. I'm standing in the parking lot of the railroad station in Kissimmee, Florida, at Dakin Avenue. And as Providence would have it, I'm actually standing here and I'm hearing the train approaching. Do you see the blinking lights of the cross street there? And I think the sound of the train is coming this door. There goes the train! How cool is that? I show up, and the train shows up. Perfect timing. From everything I've been able to find, this is the original 1883 building. Now, it's been renovated a number of times through the years, but this is the same station that operated at the very beginning of the rail line. The modern use of this railroad station is the Amtrak system. Let me just mention that the railroad station is right next door to the Lynx bus line interchange here in Kissimmee, so that people coming, I guess, off the train can get on the bus. I guess. Now, the reason I brought you here to Kissimmee to show you the railroad station is because that is the beginning of our story that involves St. Cloud. There was a spur on the railroad system, a spur that came off of the South Florida Railroad near this station, and I'm going to take you that way in a moment. It went down Neptune Road over into St. Cloud, and I'm going to drive that route here shortly. This railroad station was built in 1883. By 1888, a man by the name of Hamilton Disston opened. He was an agricultural industrialist, a real estate developer, and so on. So over in East Osceola County, where St. Cloud is now, there was no St. Cloud then, but where St. Cloud is now, he began to develop the sugarcane industry. In fact, if you've ever watched Adam's very first video, he shows the remains of the original sugar mill in St. Cloud. Anyway, remember now that the area there that is now St. Cloud there was no city there. It was just all agriculture. There were citrus orchards, sugarcane fields. There were pastures for cattle grazing, and so on, prior to it being developed like it is in the modern world we have today. So, following an exact line of the railroad is difficult to plot. But the spur that came from here, off of the main railroad, and ran over down Neptune Road, through St. Cloud, over to Narcoossee, that was the rail line. And back in that day, when they built railroads, they attempted, as best they could, to build them in a straight line. Well, the grid, obviously, of a city that is built later turns up not to exactly match up with the exact railroad bed. I'm just telling you that right now. But what I want you to see is the interesting connection between Kissimmee and St. Cloud in this regard with the railroad. The railroad was called the Sugar Belt Rail Line. I don't know if I mentioned that already or not, but that was the name of this spur that came from Narcoossee to Kissimmee, or technically, I guess, from Kissimmee to Narcoossee. The purpose of the railroad, the Sugar Belt Railway, was to transport produce and freight and so on, and passengers from between Kissimmee and St. Cloud, bringing all of that to the main line so that could be transported to the markets. And this continued until the early 1900s. And then, because of the changing world that was becoming a modern world, and the invention of the automobile and all of that, the train ultimately fell into disuse, and the produce was less and less, and so on. And eventually, I think it was 1942 is when it actually ceased existence, and the tracks for the railroad were all removed. I'm going to try to locate a city map of St. Cloud, a paper city map. Do those even exist anymore? I'm going to try to locate one, and I'm going to attempt, mind you, to point out on the paper map, draw out for you how the rail line probably ran, overlaid against the grid of the city. Think about it now. Keep in mind now, in the 1880s, there was no St. Cloud. It was a village. It was a colony of Union soldiers that are first established, along with Mr. Disston's sugar mill, was a colony basically of Civil War soldier veterans that settled in that area. I've heard stories that the reason these Union soldiers came and settled here in Florida was because the federal government of the United States gave away land. Now, I don't know how true that is. I haven't researched that. And that's why so many of them came down to Florida and settled this area. I'll have to do more research on that. If any of you know anything about that, I'd be happy to hear about it in the comments. St. Cloud wasn't established as a city, an incorporated city, until 1909. So from the 1880s to the 1909, most of that was just all rural, and the city would be developed out of all of this over time. Now let's look and see what that route may have been like. So coming out of the station on Dakin Avenue, the rail line would have followed Neptune Road out of town. There's the rail line, and we're traveling down Neptune Road eastbound. the direction that the rail line would have followed. Remember, they built railroads back in those days to try to follow as straight a line as possible. The road, obviously, is not going to actually follow every little detail of that rail line bed, but this is the basic idea. The Sugar Belt Railway not only carried the produce, citrus, vegetables, and so on, but also transported passengers. I've actually spoken with some elderly people here in the local area who rode that train as a child. And they talked about it going over to St. Cloud. And then there was a turnaround over in the other end in Narcoossee. They turned the engine around and the engine pushed the train cars back to Kissimmee. It's a pretty cool thing to do in the 1800s, I guess. I think I mentioned that the rail line lasted until the 1940s. So there were still people that are living today that were living then. I mean, look at me. I was alive in the 1940s. Here's the intersection of Neptune Road and Parton Settlement Road. This is where that construction begins that we saw in a previous video. Widening the road between Kissimmee and St. Cloud, Neptune Road. Construction going on all over the city and the county. Growing population. Got a lot of roads. Got to have a lot of roads. Got to widen the roads. More people coming. More people coming. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go straight across Neptune Road exactly because they're doing work on a bridge on the other side of Old Canoe Creek Road. So we're going to have to detour around that, and then I'll bring you out on the other side where Neptune Road intersects with US 192. I have successfully traversed the terrain and conquered the obstacle course to get around the construction of that bridge. And coming out now on Neptune Road, this is US 192. Now the railway, the Sugar Belt Railway, hey, Big the Foot, how you doing? Did not follow 192. But if you look across the street, over in that diagonal corner, you will see another street coming out to meet 192. See the tall metal electrical poles there? That's 10th Street in St. Cloud. That's 10th Street. The railway came across here at Neptune Road and continued on down what now is 10th Street. See? There's 10th Street back over there. There's those poles down 10th Street. That's where the railroad would have continued there going into St. Cloud. Of course, again, remember, there was no town of St. Cloud in the 1880s. So this was just all open agricultural land. So the railroad went down what now is 10th Street, and I'll show you a couple of other things when we get over there. We passed over 192 onto 10th Street, and we're pursuing the railway bed of the railroad. Keep in mind, the railroads were built in straight lines as much as they could. Some sources say that 10th Street is the railroad bed. Other sources say no, that is not technically true. The rail bed would not have gone straight down 10th Street. And when we get into town, we're going to come to St. Cloud's Railroad Station, and I'm going to suggest to you which of those theories is correct. We're now approaching the intersection of 10th Street and New York Avenue. New York Avenue is St. Cloud's main street, if you will. And I want to show you that I'm going to turn here to show you there's the train station over here. And that's a good, wow, how many yards between the train station and the railroad track if 10th Street was, in fact, the railroad track. So that's why I'm saying I don't think the actual railroad ran exactly down 10th Street, because the tracks would not be that far from the railroad station. Does that make any sense? So that's why I think the 10th Street railroad bed is not an exact measurement for the railroad. Remember, these buildings were not built back in the 1880s. Mr. Disston's railway didn't exist until 1888. St. Cloud was not incorporated into a city until 1909. And I do not know how much of the street diagram of St. Cloud existed prior to 1888. So once again, I'm just making the block and want to show you again the distance between 10th Street that exists now and the old railroad depot. What is that, about 50 yards or so? So I believe that the railroad bed actually came up closer to the building, like maybe right about here, and would have passed by the building at a much closer point. The building obviously is no longer used as a railroad station. It is, however, utilized by the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars. They use the facility for a variety of activities. So the building is still in use. I've actually eaten lunch here once with a friend. We should come back one day and look around the VFW. But not today. We have a railroad to pursue as we press on. We're continuing down 10th Street, theoretically following the path of the Sugar Belt Railway system out toward Narcoossee, where it ended. From the research that I could find, I noted that although there were discrepancies in whether the railroad actually followed the 10th Street grid or not, all the resources I saw was that at some point the railway system did become the roadbed for 10th Street on the east side of town, which is where we're heading. Now, I don't know where that became a reality here, what street, cross street that might have been, where that merged into what today is 10th Street. But let's just imagine that we are now on the railway. I mean, it's easier for you to say, the railroad bed. Having just made that comment, I remembered a kink in the road up here on 10th Street. 10th Street actually does not literally go straight from here. We're about to experience that kink where the road's going to wiggle around, and it's very possible that this is where the actual railroad and 10th Street connect. because this is about, geographically, is that the right word? If you followed the straight line from where we were at the train station through that little wiggly curve there, that looks like about 50 yards. About the space what I thought the railroad was too far split back from the railroad station. Maybe now this is the bed. This probably is the railroad bed for the Sugar Belt Railway. I think the actual technical term, legal term, was the St. Cloud and Sugar Belt Railway that Mr. Disston built. Now you'll notice that we are approaching, and now we are passing Mount Peace Cemetery on 10th Street, where Adam is laid to rest. So following this as the riverbed, the riverbed, oh my goodness, the railway bed. Oh gosh, what's happening in my brain? The railway bed. The railway bed. There we go. When you look at a map, you'll discover that at some point the railroad bed would have turned and gone northeast from 10th Street. I don't know where that happens along the road, because it goes up, the railroad went to Narcoossee, which is to the left up here at this light, and ended at what is now a traffic light in Narcoossee. I'll show you that in a second. We're about to turn on Narcoossee Road. It's called Narcoossee Road because it's the road to Narcoossee. Just ahead, we're approaching the village community called Narcoossee. When I first moved here in 1991, this was nothing but a blinking light and a few buildings, but it's built up into quite a residential area over the years. We're going to come up here to a traffic light, and we're going to turn left, and I'll show you where I think the roundabout was for the locomotive for the Sugar Belt Railway System. Here we are, Jones Road. Jones Road. Some heavy traffic here. Let's hope I don't get run over. Thank you. I did not get run over. This store on the northwest corner of the intersection we just turned on says that it is the Narcoossee Feed and Hardware. The research that I have followed says that the roundabout was somewhere near the rear of the feed store. I don't know if this is that feed store or not, because this building here, when we moved here, which is currently not in use, if my memory serves me correctly, and you know you can count on that, this also was labeled as a feed store. So somewhere behind this store or this store is what is left of the remains of the roundabout for the locomotive for the Sugar Belt Railway. Now, years ago, when Adam was doing his adventure videos in the beginning, he told me once that he found that roundabout Now, my research says that there are still remnants of the concrete from the roundabout. Other research says that all that's left is the pit that the roundabout rested in. I, of course, at my age and with my limitations, have not been able to traverse all through the woods back there to find out which place the actual site was. Adam never brought me out here and showed it to me. However, the research suggests that it really is not easily accessible anyway because it's now on private property. Not easily noticeable from any photographs or aerial Google Maps stuff. But somewhere near where I'm parked right now, when the Sugar Belt Railway was in use, Narcoossee, at some point near the intersection of what now is Jones Road, made the turnaround for the trip back to Kissimmee. And you know what I mean when I say roundabout. The railroad roundabout would be where the locomotive would pull up onto a circle with the rails. Mechanisms would unhook the rails from each other. Then you would unhook the rail cars from the locomotive, turn the locomotive around, rehook the rail cars, the train cars, to the locomotive on the front, and then the locomotive pushes the train back to Kissimmee. That's kind of the theory in my brain. How does that theory sound to you? You are talking to a guy who cannot talk, I'll tell you right now. You know what I mean? Okay. I was going to get a paper map and draw this out for you on a paper map, but lo and behold, I couldn't find a paper map. Either they do not exist anymore, or I just gave up too soon. All right, here we go. This is U.S. Highway 192 here. We came in on Neptune Road over here, and we came up this way, and this is the place where 192 intersects with Neptune Road. Now we turned and came down this way, and then turned and got over on 10th Street here. But here's 10th Street. This is what I was trying to explain to you when we were in the car. See how 10th Street comes right up through this way? That was the railroad. That was the railroad bed for the Sugar Mill Railway. Then, let me move this over real quick here. We came down here further, and here is the VFW building. No, that's not the VFW building, my bad. Here's the VFW building here. That's the VFW building there that we stopped at. And then there's 10th Street again going out. 10th Street again going out. And there's that little squiggly thing going down 10th Street. And that's probably where the actual railroad bed was. And then we kept coming out. We kept coming out 10th Street. And then we came to Narcoossee Road here. So somewhere between over here and we're going to see in a second, Narcoossee is way up at the top up here. The railroad cut up this direction. And let me get up to Narcoossee real quick. Narcoossee real quick. Going up Narcoossee Road here. Narcoossee Road. There you go. Stay awake. We're almost at the Narcoossee. Hold on. And here is Narcoossee. And you see right there? I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera or not, but there's that hardware store. I parked right here. And I showed you that store with a sign. And I showed you this vacant building and told you that one of these is that hardware store. Now that I'm looking at the aerial map, look at what we got here. Look at here. You know what? Does that look like a circle to you? Does that look like a circle to you? I bet that's where that roundabout was, right there. How about that? Turn the engine around right there. All righty then. Ain't that something? Classic car alert. Classic car alert. Check this out. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. Thanks for joining me in today's video. And thanks again for your continued references of sympathy and condolences on the loss of our son. That just means so much to us. I hope that these videos have some meaning for you, as they do for me. You know, everybody's got a story. Everybody has a story to tell. And you don't know what the person you're talking to is going through. So do something in your life that expresses concern and goodness and kindness to people around you. You just don't know what they're facing. You don't know what a smile or an encouraging word might do to their spirits, to lift them up and turn them around from negative stuff in their life. So you be part of the positive change. That's all. Just a thought as we close out the video. And if the Lord wills, we'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Wow.
Great.